Okay. Oh, my hair looks crazy today. Sorry about that. Hi guys, it's Miss Checka. It's me. We're going to read some Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We're very, very close to the end here. I think we're just like maybe 1 or 2 days away, and we need to start thinking about what we want to do next. So when we left off, Alice was at a trial, and the judge was the King of Hearts, and all the jurors were writing on their slate. So let's see what happened. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand. And she went round the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day, and this was of very little use as it left no mark on the slate. All right, so it's Tess. So poor Bill, he has gotten beat up by all of these different characters, and now Alice kind of bullied him and took his pencil, and so now he's just writing like this, but it doesn't make any mark. Harold, read the accusation, said the king. Okay, so Harold is a great word because it's a noun and a verb, and if you follow the Christian religion, you might have heard at Christmas time the song "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," and that's not about a person named Harold. It's this, right? So the rabbit is the herald. So the herald is the guy that tells news. So he's got his trumpet, he's got his scroll, and he is going to like tell news. Yeah, support Bill. I'm with you. Okay, Harold, read the accusation, said the king. On this, the white rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict, the king said to the jury. Not yet, not yet, the rabbit hastily interrupted. There's a great deal to come before that. So you know what the verdict is? The verdict is like you're guilty or you're not guilty. And the king's ready to like say that like immediately, but you know, they haven't heard anything. Call the first witness, said the king, and the white rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out, First witness. The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand. Oh, here's my teacup. With a teacup in one hand and bread and butter in the other. Oh, I beg your pardon, your majesty, he began, for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for. You ought to have finished, said the king. When did you begin? The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court arm in arm with the Dormouse. 14th of March, I think it was, he said. 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Dormouse. Write that down, said the king to the jury. And the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates and then added them up and then reduced the answers to shillings and pence. Take off your hat, the king said to the Hatter. It isn't mine, said the Hatter. Stolen, the king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of that fact. I keep them to sell, the Hatter added as an explanation. I'm none of my own. I'm a Hatter, right? So like that makes sense. He's wearing a hat, but it's not his hat. It's one of the hats that he uses to sell to other people. Here the queen put on her spectacles, which are her glasses, and began staring hard at the Hatter, who turned pale and frightened. Give your evidence, said the king, and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot. This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other. He looked uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion, he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Yeah, no, this is like a goofy trial. So yeah, if you look at somebody really hard and you're like, don't be nervous. And then you threaten them. It's going to make them nervous. So this is like a great illustration right here of the Mad Hatter and his teacup and his bread and butter. And you can see that he has taken a bite out of the bread and butter, but he has also taken a bite out of his teacup. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first that she'd get up and leave the court. But on second thoughts, she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her. I wish you wouldn't squeeze so, said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. I can hardly breathe. I can't help it, said Alice very meekly. I'm growing. Well, you've no right to grow here, said the Dormouse. Don't talk nonsense, said Alice more boldly. I know you're growing too, which is totally true. If you are a kid, you are growing right now. Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace, said the Dormouse, not in that ridiculous fashion. And he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time, the Queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court, Bring me the list of singers in the last concert, on which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he shook off both his shoes. Give your evidence, the King repeated angrily, or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not. I'm a poor man, Your Majesty, the Hatter began in a trembling voice, and I hadn't begun my tea, not about a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin, and with the twinkling of the tea. The twinkling of the what? Said the King. Well, it began with the tea, the Hatter replied. Well, of course, twinkling begins with a T, said the King sharply. Do you take me for a dunce? Go on. I'm a poor man, the Hatter went on, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said, I didn't, the March Hare hurriedly interrupted in a great hurry. You did, said the March Hare. He denies it, said the King. Leave out that part. Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said, the Hatter went on, looking anxiously to see if he would deny it too. But the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. Well, after that, continued the Hatter, I cut some more bread and butter. But what did the Dormouse say? One of the jury asked. Well, that I can't remember, said the Hatter. Well, you must remember, remarked the King, or I'll have you executed. The miserable Hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and went down on one knee. I'm a poor man, Your Majesty, he began. Well, you're a very poor speaker, said the King. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered, yay, and then was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. As that is rather a hard word, I will just explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this, they slipped the guinea pig head first and then sat upon it, that's also how I'm going to suppress people when they annoy me. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Alice. I've so often read in the newspapers at the end of trials, there was an attempt at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant until now. If that's all you know about it, you may stand down, continued the King. I can't go no lower, said the Hatter. I'm on the floor as it is. Well, then you may sit down, said the King replied. Here the other guinea pigs cheered, yee, and was suppressed. Here, come, that finishes the guinea pigs, thought Alice. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said the Hatter with an anxious look at the Queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go. And the Hatter hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. So let's take a little look at the Hatter. There he is, and he is running away and getting out of there. I would also run out of that courtroom if I was there. And just take his head off outside, said the queen added to one of the officers. But the hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was even before she got into the court. By the way, the people near the door all began sneezing at once. Give your evidence, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. Well, if I must, I must, the king said with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Pepper mostly, said the cook. Oh, treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Collar that dormouse, the queen shrieked. Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Suppress him. Pinch him. Off with his whiskers. Off with his whiskers is the best line in this whole book. You have to admit that. Suppress him. Pinch him. Off with his whiskers. For some minutes, the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Never mind, said the king with an air of great relief. Call the next witness. And he added in an undertone to the queen, Really, my dear, you should cross-examine the next witness. It quite makes my forehead ache. Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next evidence would be like. But they haven't got much evidence yet, she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice, Alice! Chapter 12, Alice's Evidence. Here, cried Alice, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes. And she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen onto the heads of the crowd below, and there they lay sprawling about, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish that she had accidentally upset the week before. Oh, I beg your pardon, she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and she began picking them up as quickly as she could, for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, and she had a vague sort of idea they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they must die. Tess, I know, should be head, but she says whiskers, so it's funny. This here is Alice, and she's getting big, and there are all of the little jury people. And they've kind of fallen out. I don't know what to tell you. It says off with his whiskers, and it cracks me up. Okay. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste, she had put the lizard in head downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quite unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. Not that it signifies much, she said to herself. I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up or as the other. So once again, here's Bill. Bill got knocked out of the jury box, and then she squishes him down, head downwards, and then she puts him right upwards, and then she says this mean thing about how it doesn't matter if his head or his feet are up. Poor Bill. Team Bill. That's what I say. Support Bill. As soon as the jury had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them, and they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident. All except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit there with its mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the court. I mean, listen, Bill, you just relax there because you had like a rough day. What do you know about this business? The king said to Alice. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever? Persisted the king. Nothing whatever, said Alice. That's very important, the king said, turning to the jury. The jury was just beginning to write this down on their slates when the white rabbit interrupted. Unimportant. Your Majesty means, of course, he said in a respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. Unimportant. Of course, I meant, the king hastily said, and he went on to himself in an undertone. Important, unimportant, important, unimportant, important, as if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down important and some unimportant. Alice could see this as she was near enough to look over their slates, but it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, called out, "Silence!" and read out from his book, Rule 42, all persons more than a mile high to leave the court. Everybody looked at Alice. I'm not a mile high, said Alice. You are, said the king. Nearly 2 miles high, added the queen. Well, I shan't go at any rate, said Alice. Besides, that's not a regular rule. You just invented it just now. It's the oldest rule in the book, said the king. Well, then it ought to be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. Consider your verdict, he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. So number 1, Alice has a point. Number 2, yeah, Bill's having a rough life. There's more evidence to come yet, please your majesty, said the white rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. This paper has just been picked up. What's in it? Said the queen. I haven't opened it yet, said the white rabbit, but it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to somebody. Oh, it must have been that, said the king, unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual, you know. Well, who's it, which, you know, that's true. If you're writing a letter, you're usually writing a letter to somebody and not to nobody. Who's it directed to? Said one of the jurymen. It isn't directed at all, said the white rabbit. In fact, there's nothing written on the outside. He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, it isn't a letter after all. It's a set of verses. Are they in the prisoner's handwriting? Asked another of the jurymen. No, they're not, said the white rabbit. And that's the queerest thing about it. The jury all looked puzzled. He must have imitated somebody else's hand, said the king. The jury all brightened up again. Please, your majesty, said the knave. I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name signed at the end. If you didn't sign it, said the king, that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or you'd have signed your name like an honest man. There was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. So here's this poem, right? It's verse, and it's not in the knave's handwriting. It doesn't have the knave's name on it. He says he didn't write it. And so wouldn't a logical conclusion be like, well, I mean, I guess he didn't write it. But what they're saying is like, it's not his handwriting. He must have faked his handwriting. He doesn't have his name. See, he must have written it because like only guilty people don't put their names down. So I don't know about this. That proves his guilt, of course, said the queen. So off with... It doesn't prove anything of the sort, said Alice. Why, you don't even know what they're about. Read them, said the king. The white rabbit put on his spectacles. Where shall I begin, your majesty? He asked. Begin at the beginning, said the king, very gravely. gravely. Go on till you come to the end and then stop. There was dead silence in the court whilst the White Rabbit read out these verses. They told me you had been to her and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her one, they gave him two, you gave us three or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've had all day, said the king, rubbing his hands in glee. So now let the jury. If any one of them can explain it, said Alice. She had grown so large in the last few minutes, she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting him. I'll give him a sixpence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning in it. The jury all wrote down on their slates, she doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning in it. But none of them attempted to explain on the paper. If there's no meaning in it, said the king, that saves a world of trouble, you know, as we needn't try to find any. So I think that is actually a good place to stop because we are out of time for today and we can just all contemplate within ourselves whether this has any meaning in it or if it's just nonsense. So I hope everybody had a good day. Keep in the back of your mind, maybe you have some suggestions or some requests of what we could read next. I was thinking maybe holds, but I am open to suggestions. All right, guys, be good. Eat your fruits and vegetables. Be nice to each other.